I have a very interesting task here for the last session of this day, coming after all these great speakers that talk about brilliant applications, be it on 3D printed models, be it on guides, be it on implants. And here I am tasked to talk about when things go wrong and what to do. So it's quite interesting. Let me figure this out. Okay. One slide with a little bit of history. Okay. What you can see here is, I'm sorry, I'm messing this up. What you can see over here is history. Yeah? This is the very first year of Materialise back in 1990. The very first 3D printed hip. Yeah, it's a hip model, as you can see here, with here the femur. That was created. It was done in stereolithography, a little bit of a shady looking color still back then. And this is what we do now. So the previous presentation is the perfect segue. We create fully custom 3D printed titanium 3-French hip implants with custom porous bonus hole filling structures. So technologically, we've made a huge leap. And 3D printing is also being shown every day. Every day you can see a new article, a new feature popping up where 3D printing is actually making a difference in patients' lives, in surgeons' lives, in companies' lives. And well, I work at Materialise, so yeah, we're at the midst of all of this. Yet, things do go wrong. Yeah? And I want to introduce patient Murphy. This is a case study. This is a 1-year-old child with a complex congenital heart disease. Double outlet right ventricle, a case that we've seen a couple of times over the last 2 days. And the professor that is treating this patient, he has seen all of these publications. He's gone to conferences and he has seen that, wow, people are doing this. They're doing 3D printing. I'm doing it as well. And he's working at a big university, so he's going to the biomedical engineering department, and the professor there says, my PhD student has made a 3D reconstruction software last year, so yes, we can help you. And the mechanical engineering professor says, we have built a 3D printer last year, so yes, we can help you. And brilliant, this doctor says. So what do we need? Well, we need MRI data. Okay, I have radiologists at my hospital, that works out pretty good, so I'll get you an MRI. They get a standard MRI, and what you have to know is that whenever these patients get an MRI, they need to have full sedation. Yeah? So these 1-year-old babies, they come to the hospital, the family is there, they go under full sedation, and they go under the scanner that way. So it's quite invasive for these young patients to do so. They get the scan, but they see slice distance is 5 millimeters. We're talking about small kids. So yeah, from a reconstruction point of view, this data is just not good enough. So the professor is persistent. He pushes away some of the policies from the hospital, and he gets, again, that patient has to come back to the hospital. The family is there, has to go under full sedation again to get that scan. So, yeah, so they have to redo the entire imaging process. Quite a concerning mistake. Next thing, all is well. The data is burned onto a DVD, and a student from the biomedical engineering department goes there and picks up the DVD. Small issue is they forgot to anonymize the patient data, so the patient's name is all over the files. But all is well up to that point. So we go to, it goes to 4 students, a very enthusiastic group of students that says, okay, we have that code from the PhD student. It turns out that this code is actually a collection of MATLAB code, a collection of MATLAB code, Microsoft Paint to color some of the images, 3 softwares that start with free something, and 2 other softwares that start with open and then something. So yes, there is software available, but they kind of have to figure it out. It also turns out they have to rewrite parts of the code that the PhD student had written before, because it was not working all that well afterwards. But regardless, 48 hours later, working in 2-man shifts around the clock, that enthusiastic group of people is looking a little bit more like this. They stick to it though, and finally they get an STL file that they can send to the printer, and they're ready to print their very first heart model, and this is what comes out of the printer at first attempt. A wonderful piece of spaghetti art, but not necessarily what you would use to treat a congenital heart. These students stick to it as well. Another 2 days later, another 5 iterations later, finally, they have a 3D reconstruction of the model. Yeah, it's a blood volume model, the very first one that they've created. So very proudly, they go into the physician's theater, but the physician says, it's kind of strange. So why is it not hollow? A heart is usually hollow. And where is the VSD? To which the student says, a VSD, you say, could you explain a little bit more about what that is? Well, a VSD, it's a ventricular septal defect. It's a hole in between the 2 ventricles of my heart. And it's actually exactly what I want to see, because depending on the location of my VSD, we can either take one surgical intervention, which is relatively simple, or we have to do very severe surgery to this child. So that's actually what I want to see. Back to the drawing board. Another 2 days later, finally, the students are able to get this hollow reconstruction model from the software. They can get a print, and they go into the multidisciplinary team meeting. Yeah, so the surgeons, cardiologists, anesthesiologists, they all join. They discuss on the model what the approach is going to be, brilliant. And they create a pre-cut patch. Yeah, so the VSD is in a positive location. They feel that they can put in a patch, and they want to save time in the operating theater by pre-cutting that patch based on the model. So surgery starts. It turns out the patch is too narrow. Yeah, it's not fitting. So they have to go back, refer to their traditional way of working, and in essence, the surgery is now taking longer than originally planned. Luckily, surgery is successful, all is well. With the right tools, they have been able to actually save this patient with the intervention as planned. But afterwards, they review back, they look at the entire process and look at all the steps, like where did we make mistakes. It turns out that when a postdoc reviews the code of the students, that there's actually a coding error, and somehow there's an 80% scaling error on the X direction of the images. So the model was actually not accurately representing the anatomy of the patient after all. And if I've learned one thing from in the last 8 years, that you do not want to anger people that every day work with sharp objects with this kind of mistakes. So it's time to tread carefully here. I can honestly say that we've never seen a case where each of these mistakes was made all at once. But each individual mistake that was made here, we've seen it happen. Yeah? So these are things that you need to take into account. Now, luckily, there's tools, there's ways, there's even regulations that force you to do that. Yeah? That force you to look at these risks, investigate them, and to also mitigate them. Because this case turned out well, but what if your patient dies? Yeah, you're talking about congenital heart disease, that's serious business. If your patient dies, there's a liability linked to that. What if, and this is more in a company setting or in a big hospital setting that has a 3D lab, what if you have multiple patients that look alike, and what if you switch two models? Yeah? What if you sent the wrong model? What if you sent the wrong guide? What if you sent the wrong implant to the wrong patient? Yeah, there's a risk that's associated to that. What if your printer is badly calibrated? How often do you have to calibrate your printer actually to be within spec of what you actually want to print? What if, this is on a bit of a different scale, what if your patient's name, which was still there in the images, is mentioned by a student to the press in all of his enthusiasm? He just talks about, yeah, this is the patient name. All of a sudden, you're there with patient privacy issues. Yeah? So all of these are things that you do need to think about. Luckily, as I said, there are tools to do so, and that's all encapsulated in risk management. And the FDA, for instance, as one of the regulating bodies globally, enforces you to do that. You have to manage the risk that ultimately you're making medical devices for patients. So this applies to medical device. On the FDA website, they have a clear explanation of what they consider to be a medical device, so what is within scope of their regulatory field. First of all, they have a very interesting way of defining things with a lot of terms. But basically, a medical device is an instrument, apparatus. It's a thing. That's what they're saying here. First bullet point, which is on a specific list on their website. Second bullet point, it's intended in the diagnosis or treatment of disease. And it's intended to affect the structure or any function of the body. So if whatever you're making falls into this definition, you fall under FDA regulations, yeah, and you have to mitigate risks in the right way. That's a big task. Yeah, we have a big regulatory quality department at Materialise, so this is something that needs to be taken quite seriously. And one tool that helps there is a risk charter. So for every medical device, you have to indicate, okay, what exactly do I want to use it for? And then you have to make very long tables that indicate what is the risk, what can go wrong, what is the effect, what is the failure mode, what is the, how often can it occur, how severe is it, and in this way you come to a quantified analysis that establishes all those risks, and that then at the end, to mitigate all those risks, what it boils down to is that you make work instructions, standard operating procedures, training and qualification. Yeah? So you have to demonstrate that all the people that are working within these work instructions and SOPs, that they have been trained to actually do so. Because things can go wrong. Looking at the case and looking from a 10-kilometer view, this is basically the very simplistic view of the process of 3D printing. Yeah? You start with images, you create a 3D reconstruction, and you do potentially a design on that. You do a 3D print, and then you have to manage, communicate, and deal with the logistic part of that. And you always have to validate your own process. Whatever you do, you are responsible for the validation of whatever process you set up for the quality of the products that you deliver. So let's explore all of these for a minute. First of all, imaging. Yeah? You start with images. If your images are not good, you won't get a good result. Yeah? So you need to have the right protocols available for your radiologists. They have to know, okay, this is the exact protocol I need to follow. Otherwise, we won't be able to use the images for the use of 3D printing. Many factors come into play. Hardware, is it a static anatomy? Is it a mobile anatomy? Do we use contrast? Do we have devices in place already that can produce artifacts? But at the end of the day, it's your job, if you're going to make a medical device, to set criteria whether you can accept or reject images, and you need to have qualified personnel to do so. The second step is 3D reconstruction and design. Yeah? You're going to get these images, you've assessed, okay, the quality is good enough. Now you're going to use software to create a 3D reconstruction. So what's important here is the level of validation and documentation. And last year in May, there was a guidance from the FDA on the use of this. So what you can see here is the amount of documentation and paperwork that for a medical device that we ship to the FDA at Materialise. Yeah? So they analyze this, they study this. So each time, for instance, that we do a new Mimics release, we have a big stack of paper that is going to the FDA to demonstrate we've done our homework and we have validated this software. So in the US, prior to 2016, you could use whatever software you wanted. Yeah? As long as you would validate your entire process, you were free in the usage of whatever software you want. Now there has been a draft guidance from the FDA indicating that for instance, anatomical models, that you need to use cleared FDA-cleared software whenever you're creating a medical device. And they even make one exception. So in that guidance, it also reads that anatomical models, if they're used as a visual reconstruction of a CT or an MRI, that actually then they are exempt if you use an FDA-cleared software to do so. Yeah, so it is a requirement, or it's becoming a requirement because it's a draft document for the FDA to do so. Good. You have your software in place. You're going into segmentation. Yeah, there's plenty. Yeah, you can use plenty of tools to do so. But at the end of the day, you have to demonstrate that you have people, again, that are trained, that are doing this, that are creating the 3D reconstruction. And when doing the 3D reconstruction, you also have to make sure that at the end, that you can do a final assessment on the images. So if you look at this example, I hope you can see that. You can do a segmentation, and then you can either get here the yellow line, or you can get the red line, which is the border of your 3D model, which has been copied back onto your images as a quality check, with very much the same process, with a very small variation in the parameters that you use. You can come to either result. And you have to demonstrate that you know, okay, which is the right one, and is this sufficiently good for the application I'm going to use it for. And that the same holds true, obviously, if you're going to design a guide or design an implant on top of this. You have to make sure that, that you're accurate in that regard. I'm going to give an example of how, for a mace, for instance, on how that was done. So on our hip implants, back in 2008, Gerlaude, they did a validation study on the accuracy of the 3D reconstruction of the anatomical structure of the hip. So what they did is they had a series of cadavers which they scanned in a standard CT scanner, much as they would do in clinical practice. They also CT scanned without the soft tissue, so they had the soft tissue removed from the cadavers. And third of all, they also had these dry cadaver bones optically scanned. That optical scan they used as their ground truth, yeah, because with optical scanning you can go down to an accuracy of a couple of microns. And the 3D reconstructions of those, following a strict protocol that they had set up, they assessed and they compared to that ground truth. And they concluded that if you follow that sound segmentation protocol, that actually they can obtain a root mean square error of less than half a voxel on these kind of femurs. Yeah? So for that process of imaging and 3D reconstruction and for their hips, they have gone through that step of validation to make sure, yes, we can deliver this in an accurate way. The final one is the 3D printing itself. And people that are new to 3D printing, they often think, we'll put it on the printer, it prints, and that's it. Yeah, but there's a whole series of things that go before that. On the 3D printing itself, there's plenty of things to take into account that many of the speakers have already addressed. You need to know what kind of material, you need to know what kind of printer you want to use here. One more example of at Materialise, how we deal with our flexible material. So we have a flexible material which is called HardPrint Flex, which is used to create our Class 1 medical devices, which are called HardPrint. So we use our HardPrint Flex process to create those. And we've gone through a validation of literature. Yeah, so we did a literature review. We looked at distensibility and at Young's modulus reported in literature for arterial tissues. We tested our materials and we find that within certain thicknesses that there's no difference in terms of those two parameters between our 3D printed models and between arterial tissue. As I said, there's the hardware, there's finishing to be done, something that's often overlooked. When you print something, there's often quite a bit of post-processing to be done. It's not, I take it off the printer and there I go. It really does not work like that. And finally, you have to assess, do I run a big risk, such a big risk, that we have to do an individual accuracy assessment? Do we have to do an individual optical scanning to check that what we print was effectively what we designed to create on your computer? And the final source of risk is management, communication, and logistics. You're dealing with medical image data. It means that there's patient data there, so you need to comply to certain regulations. You need to be HIPAA compliant. You need to take into account patient privacy whenever you're transferring, whenever you're dealing with these kind of images. You need to also think in terms of liability. Often you would want a surgeon to sign off on a certain planning in order to take the liability, so that that's a portion that you don't own, so you have to think about the communication of that. And traceability, yeah? For every medical device that you create, you have to be able to go back and say, okay, who did the segmentation on it? Were the right parameters used? What print was it on? What batch was it on? What kind of material batch did it come from? So you have to maintain that traceability whenever you want to do this. Yeah. All of the companies here are likely very familiar with all of this, so to them this is likely not something new. And then finally, shipping. Yeah? Each year, the FDA gets reports where medical device companies have sent the wrong model to the wrong patient, the wrong guide to the wrong patient. So even in shipping, things can go wrong. So you have to make sure that also there you take care of what you do. So in conclusion, these are all risks. My goal is not to scare you. My goal is just to say, when you do it right. Yeah? Look at validation. Identify what the risks are and use 3D printing for what it is. Yeah? because it's powerful. We've seen it in many, many presentations yesterday and today. We can do amazing things with 3D printing. You are doing amazing things with 3D printing, but with great power comes great responsibility as well. Thank you.